That's good. Got it. Oh. Hello to all our friends on Zoom and all our friends in this room, and welcome to the third and final workshop for this spring in the AMIGA series. AMIGA, just briefly, AMIGA is an acronym, stands for the Alliance for Multi-Campus Inclusive Graduate Admissions. It's a Mellon-funded program in which UC Davis, UCLA, and USC are working together to think through best practices in holistic admissions and think about leveraging and catalyzing holistic admissions across the UC system. So like I said, this is the third and final workshop. All of them have been recorded and will be available on the Humanities Division website. So worry not if you missed Diversity That Works in April about preparing students to apply for graduate school, or if you missed the exciting workshop that we just had a couple of weeks ago on admissions rubrics and graduate admissions, led by my esteemed colleague, whom I will introduce momentarily. So these workshops that we're having, the three, I said, it's the third and final. They are recorded, they're available for watching. They're meant to catalyze a broader conversation across the humanities. And so thank you for being here and participating in this conversation with us about graduate education in the 21st century. So to my right, as I just alluded, is Cristobal Silva. He's professor of English here at UCLA, and sitting next to him is Tamara Levitz, professor of Comp Lit and also ethnomusicology. I'm Marissa Lopez. I'm professor of English and Chicano Studies, also the associate graduate dean for diversity, inclusion, and admissions. And we are three of the 8 faculty that have been working over the past couple of years on the AMIGA grants, trying to begin conversations in our own department around holistic admissions, around equity in graduate admissions. And so we're closing out the series with this conversation about, again, graduate education in the 21st century. So fine, we can prepare students to apply to our programs, and fine, we can use rubrics to ensure that our selection processes are fair and equitable and consistent. But why are we doing these things? Why are we? Oh, that actually is a great segue into the first question we were going to discuss. In 2022, why does somebody need a PhD in the humanities? As this is a roundtable, we'll just be conversing amongst ourselves. Please use the Q&A function or the chat function. I'm monitoring both here. So if you have something to say about why we need a PhD, please put that in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll just throw it to you. What are we doing?
I'd say something. I've been working on the history of education in the United States. And when you do work on the history of education in the United States, you see how hard won, how much people have fought of a civil rights battle to have higher education in the United States. I brought today some W.E. Du Bois, because a lot of people know Du Bois was in a long-term, over decades, argument with Booker T. Washington and his followers over industrial education versus higher education. And going back, this happens to be in Indianapolis in 1912, Du Bois is arguing why Black people deserve higher education. And that was a long, bitter battle over the whole 20th century. And when you're looking at the history of education, I think you understand this is something we absolutely have to hold on to as a civil rights issue. Everyone has the right to a higher education. Not really do they need it, they have the right to it. I just want to say that.
That is a great kind of grounding for, okay, but do they need a PhD?
Well, please go ahead.
Yeah, so, well, thank you for that, because I think that is really important. And thank you for this conversation, because I think ever since I started working on AMIGA, I think that, and this is what you were saying, Marissa, that holistic admissions are really important, but they can't work in a vacuum, right? They can only work as part of a longer conversation about what we're doing, how we support our students, and what we are supporting our students for. Why does someone need a PhD in the humanities in 2022? If I'm completely frank, I don't know. I don't know that they do need one. I think it is, as you say, it's a right and it's a choice for people to do. I think it's important to ask the question, this comes back for me, is one of the first things I think we ought to ask our students when they come here is to say, What is it? What are your goals? What is it that you would like to achieve? What is it that you want a PhD for? Because I think that when we take that position, then we can be much more prepared to support them and to train them, and also to meet them on the level that they come to graduate school, right? So we know students who come hyper prepared, who are they almost seem like they could go directly to a dissertation phase. And then we have students who, frankly, like I was, who need almost to be trained from the ground up in what the work is, what the critical vocabulary is, et cetera. So, sorry, long roundabout way answers. The PhD in the humanities can do many, many more things than we're used to talking about. But I think that it's the critical thing is to keep having those conversations amongst ourselves, but also with our students.
And then I would just say also, again, historically, I feel like it took, again, decades to get the accreditation and also for each discipline to be recognized, to have the level of methodology and everything else to get the status of a PhD. And why I also think it's important, a student of ours in our department, Jason Arahu, was telling me recently, a lot of institutions in the United States are under attack, or there's really a lot of concerns about central institutions. And so the institution of higher education, it has to be changed and modified, and there's a lot to do, but we don't want to break it down. And so when I see that question, I always think right away, of course, we want to have the civil right liberty of having higher education. And then we have to talk about how it's changing, maybe it isn't, maybe it is. And that's about methodology, which I think we're going to come to later.
Yeah, or I mean, this is just an outline, so we can come to it now. I mean, when we were talking about this question amongst ourselves, like, well, why an advanced degree in the humanities? Why do we need that? There's obviously lots of ways to talk about that. But I think what you were saying, Cristobal, is that it is important for us to be talking about that as a department, right? To be clarifying with our colleagues what it is we're doing. What are we preparing? If we're going to think about how to equitably select students, then we have to think first about what we're selecting them to do, right? So are we picking people, or not are we picking people? Are we picking people so that we can train them to be us? Like, are we replicating ourselves, or are we doing something different with graduate school? So how do we start having that conversation?
I think, well, again, I'll just start with myself. So I came to graduate school in the mid-90s. I think I was was ready to apply for jobs in the early 2000s. And even at that time, we were already talking about the profession in crisis. It's hard for me to talk about the profession in crisis today, looking at the job landscape these last 2 days. I wouldn't say it's crisis, it's apocalyptic. And I assume that it's fairly similar across the humanities. And really the question is, if we want to think in terms of genre, what does the post-apocalyptic job landscape look like? And I think it's important to be frank. Like, I don't know. Like, I honestly don't know what it looks like. It could recover, or it could not recover. It's kind of impossible to say at this stage. I mean, I'm optimistic because I'm always an optimist, but the fact that we don't know what the post-apocalyptic looks like, I think, should ground our approach to our students, because it's true that our students are, given what they've been through the last 2 to 4 years anyway, are terrified about their future prospects. So I think we need to be really thoughtful in the way we speak with them, we approach them, but also in the way that we train them, right? If we're training them to teach at an R1 institution like we are, we do them certain favors in that way, but we also do them a disservice in other ways. If we're not confident that we can place them. I think those are important conversations. I think many of our students will get placed in research work, and some won't. And again, that we need to be open to that.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm staring at you.
No.
We're very close.
Yeah. And also when I talk, I go that way, so I apologize. I also think one thing I've learned from the AMIGA program, which I find very valuable, it has been valuable to me to think about what methods this is separate from the labor, but what methods is our department What methods do we teach students? What are we actually giving them? And in comparative literature, languages are very, very important. And it's kind of, I think everyone has a consensus on I don't want to speak for anyone, but a consensus on the importance of language. But it's been helpful to do that before going to the admissions process and understanding, okay, we have a basis in languages. We need to look if people are prepared in that way, that preparedness part of AMIGA, or part of what I've learned here. I feel what's changing is methods. So I feel in comparative literature, they're changing somewhat differently than in musicology. I think in musicology, it's leading to a diffuse sense of crisis, because the type of music and the methods are changing so much. But I think it's interesting, like you said, to sit around and say methods. Why I say this, years ago, another colleague here, Professor Cristobal, spoke to me about, he asked me, what methods are you teaching in musicology?
Mm-hmm.
And it occurred to me how far away we've gotten from that kind of discussion. And yet it's kind of at the basis of how we judge a lot of things. So that was one thing comes to mind. I love, and I'll say quickly, that you mentioned labor, because I think actually that is it's a crisis around funding and labor. Like a lot of the funding at UCLA for graduate students hasn't changed in 30 years. And I don't know if anyone looked at the prices since COVID, but that's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. And I don't know if that's really some kind of movement that has to be in place to get the labor situation changed. I do think updating has failed. No, that's not what I do.
But that is what you're saying, right?
The updating
funding
has failed.
hasn't
Like
changed.
you look even at famous grants like the Guggenheim, they're offering 50,000. How is that still a prestigious? Sorry, that I mean, some people can 50,000 is a very hard salary in certain places. Whatever. I know 50,000 is a lot, but the Guggenheim is claiming it's way more than it is, and so none of this has been updated. And that's what I wonder what's going to happen in the universe. That's the part, the labor situation needs to change, the funding, UCLA is very wealthy. I'm not sure why the money isn't funneled to students, why that funding never goes up, and stuff like that. Like the quarter rollers, I don't know if it's gone up in 30 years, the amount that it is, or maybe it has.
Well, I can say just parenthetically that for my position in the dean's office, I know that is something that Dean Edner is very, very concerned with, and is currently working with APB, planning a budget to increase that funding. And we all know that that's an issue. I want to circle back though to what you were saying about methods, and try to find a way to link this question of methods to the why advanced training in the humanities. Why do you need advanced training? Because you're learning how to do things, right? You're learning stuff, right? But you're learning research, you're learning project management, you're learning all sorts of things that can lead to a fulfilling career in higher education, or could lead to something else, right? And we have to be open to the fact that something else exists, even if we ourselves are not capable or prepared or equipped to train our students necessarily to do that something else, right? So we need to think about the world of work in the future, the fact that we don't know what the humanities professionals of the future are going to be doing. So then when we think about who we're selecting for our programs, it feels to me like a no-brainer. Like we have to be looking for people who are not us, or who have the capacity to be us, but who also have the capacity to push our fields to places where we are not able to imagine, because we don't know the future. So they're going to have to write that future. It's not going to be us.
I wonder, this is a question sort of in response to what you're saying. I agree with that. I wonder to what extent that might be also kind of a geographically determined question. So like being in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles being a place with so many different industries. So we know we have students, for example, who go work in entertainment because there's like a, I don't want to say seamless, but like a pathway there that can be, that can be worked fairly in a non-complicated way. What would that look like if we were an institution somewhere else, like at other UCs, which may not be close to the entertainment hub, or other state universities or private universities in the middle of the country, which are like quite distanced from both coasts. So that's just a genuine question I have. But,
And I guess, sorry, will you finish?
No, I'm done. Yeah.
I guess I again think historically, because it actually is. So one of the things I think it was somewhere in the questions about talking to the students. I think it would be great for everyone to have a little history on the university. And one thing is, you can look through historically and see so many times where egregious mistakes were made. You know, at Barnard in the 1920s, they were interviewing Jews because they didn't want that many Jews, and they would find something psychologically wrong with the Jew. That is might be partly hearsay, but I think there's enough support of that. Or at Yale, and so many stories. And I think we can learn from those stories. And what I love about AMIGA, or also I've been watching. If you watch, well, since in the last few years in the US with everything that's happening, the legal system has been interesting. And can we look at models in other places where people were able to obtain objectivity? Because we still in academia have a lot of that. Look at the school, or I don't like doing that, but look, or people will talk about personality when that's really a no-no, but they will. And so it's finding out the pitfalls in the past, or making people conscious of, oh my God, so much, like we've been through this problem with admissions in 1950. We've been through the problem with SATs. We've been through the problem with doing interviews with students, and then trying to find models. And I think we are moving towards that here, that are objective. Like, for example, if it's preparedness, you're not adding all that other stuff. They either, you have to be careful, because again, I'm doing the history of education in the 19-teens. They would say that the Black students didn't have Latin, but they also didn't provide Latin in Black schools. So you have to constantly weigh that. Yeah, anyway. But I guess I like, again, the historical perspective. We're trying to really give colleagues some awareness. I think there's just been so many decades of, we know how to do it, sort of, I guess.
To pick up on that thread, well, I wanted to pick up on that thread. I want to circle back to what you were saying about geography. And I feel like that is the one gift, if we can say there's a gift that COVID has given us, is the realization that your work doesn't necessarily have to be geographically conscripted, right? That I feel like that, and who knows what that, what change that's going to catalyze or what that is going to make possible. But your point is still well taken. Like LA, to be in a big metropolitan area is one thing to say, like, think about, connected careers or parallel tracks. But if you're in, Champaign, Urbana, it's not so easy. Oh my gosh, I wanted to say that, and then I totally forgot. What were you just saying? I wanted to pick up on that thread. What was the thread?
Some kind of objectivity in admissions. So you can't ask Latin of people who are in schools that specifically were forbidden from taking Latin.
Right, and you were saying you have to, that one of the things we have to do is generate awareness, right? Help our colleagues, or learn from our colleagues, whatever. Yes. But having conversations with colleagues, which isn't always easy. And this is something that we talked about in kind of the planning for this. How these conversations aren't easy to have because they can be unhealthy conversations to have, because there's so much ego invested in. There can be a lot of ego invested in what we do, right? So if we think about, well, what is the purpose of graduate education? The answer could be, it is to train people to try to be like me. But I'm going to throw this ball to Cristobal, because you kind of brought this up earlier. Like, how do you navigate that?
How do you navigate? Sorry, which
ego? I know of the 10 things that I just said.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not even going to go into that one.
Okay.
No, I mean, again, I think there's the word I would use is, in training students, I think there's a degree of humility that's needed on our part, which is, again, to inquire into their interests and their goals. And, I think that's certainly one of the things I try to do, like, on a continuing basis, right? To recognize that a student's goal might be different their first week they're on campus from when they're even their 10th week on campus at the end of a quarter, at the end of every year. And if we can think kind of capaciously in that sense, to give them, again, the best guidance we can, like, I try to be straightforward. So I'm most qualified to prepare you to be sitting in my desk. And if that's what you want, then we will go in that direction. I do think, coming back to your original question, do we need a PhD? What do we need a PhD, humanities PhD for in 2022? I will also say that I think that the skills that we train for, so it's a discipline, it's writing, it's I suppose critical thinking, to use an overused term, all of those things are absolutely can be translated and used in many, many different fields. And so I think in asking the goal question and having that humility, we can help students build, I'll use this metaphor, an off-ramp if they turn out not to want to go in they don't want to end up sitting behind my desk. But I think that's important. I think in the past, so I've taught at many different institutions before coming to UCLA. And one of the things that's the most heartbreaking is to see students struggling with trying to find a way out of the institute. They want to get a PhD, they want to finish their PhD, but they don't want to end up working at an Ivy League school or R1. And often it's very difficult for them to have that conversation because that looks like failure. Or they're afraid of disappointing their advisors. And that's where again, I don't know if ego is the right thing, but that's where the humility is needed. Like, my goal is for you for my students to be happy, to lead healthy, happy lives. I think if you can do that, then that's the greatest thing I can help you achieve, whether that looks like it's in, again, R1 or any other venue, but to help students not feel like it's failure to step away, right? I mean, I think we all probably had this experience. Some of the smartest people I know are people who I met in graduate school who decided not to complete their PhDs. It has nothing to do with intelligence or anything like that. It has to do with their, choosing a life path that was different. I think we have to normalize that and be happy with that. And yeah, I'll stop there.
And I guess I'd say a few things. One thing I would say is, I think talking with colleagues, I think you need a good context and good professional boundaries and a really, really prepared conversation. So maybe like AMIGA is doing, where there is preparation, where there is moderate mediation, where maybe everyone reads the text together and can discuss some of the texts we've seen, discuss it together. And I tend to think in Complit we have that very productive atmosphere. So, the second thing I would say is, I've never thought anyone should copy who I am or even be in academia, but I'm from Canada, so maybe I don't know.
You're just nicer.
But I also am doing this work on the history of education. I'm not sure if we should stick with the mentor system. Sorry, everybody. There's a lot of people who want to move away from one dissertation advisor. And if you look at the history of how that came about, that we have these mentors, there's a lot of talk of making committees. And if you had something a little more democratic, we do have committees, but we have the advisor. If we would continue in the direction of a plurality of advisors, I think some of this ownership and ego might, it would be a way of keeping it in check if there is such a thing. And the other thing I was going to say, this conversation has been going on for quite a while in musicology and in Complit, and I feel we're a little there already. When I was teaching Introduction to Complit, the graduate course this fall, the students seemed very there and aware of all. There are actually different opportunities out there than there were before, and so the landscape is changing, and all of us don't know how. But I think a lot of people are, I'm not sure, I would not know the statistics, how many are coming in wanting necessarily a professorial job or wanting another kind of job or having other ambitions. But I feel like because we've been doing this for a while, we're no longer at the place where everyone's like, you mean there are jobs outside academia? Like we're not at that place anymore. But I guess I wanted to emphasize the mentor, because we got to get away from, professors are some kind of superstar or whatever. We really got to go. It's education. We're teachers. Everyone's a teacher. So, and that would help, I think, higher education.
Just like a little, when you were speaking at this, the one little anecdote is that I don't remember the last time I heard this phrase, which I hated anyways, which was alt app, right? And I think the disappearance, I mean, it was necessary for a moment, but then the disappearance of that term, I think, does work toward the normalization of just thinking about careers, right? And career choices. And so I think that's a great thing.
And it came along with an interesting moment of quitlet and anger at the university, which was an interesting moment that we haven't really got yet deciphered what that all meant.
Critical university studies.
Critical university,
right? Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, that's still a thing.
Yeah. So that's there was more going on there. A student, Omar Zaza, and I were looking once into why Quitlet started and where it started. And it started in the 30s. There were multiple eras of Quitlet, multiple moments when there's this generational change, the big one being 68. So we definitely are having a generational change as well as everything else, I guess.
Yeah, I like this like conversation. I wanted to come back to Cristobal, what you were saying about career diversity, and I think kind of generally, at least amongst us three, and certainly musicology, because you have Nina Eichheim, who has been like a real mover and shaker around these conversations. But I also like thinking about critical university studies that you just brought up, Tamara, because I like the idea. Like I was saying earlier, right? We're training students to be the humanities professionals of the future. We're training them to do what we know how to do, but also to do something else, right? And so that may be non-academic, but it also may be that we're training them to change the university, right? To be professors in a way that we don't know how to be.
They're doing it, yeah. Yeah, and there's stuff like you mentioned, Humanists at Work. That was that was a fabulous project. Yeah, I think that's what's. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't. You didn't interrupt.
But I really think that's what's happening. There's a lot of that going on. Well, not us, instead of just workshops, things going on. Everyone is learning or taking away how they want to change things moving forward.
Yeah, no, I think no, I agree.
But I do think we probably have to pay more attention to it. Like the Christopher Noy, he came and gave a talk here, and he said there's a phenomenon where professors just ignore this. Like since 1968, they've just been in a deep sleep and nothing wakes them up. And it was interesting, and it's true. It's hard to get this this mobilization where professors feel, okay, the university's changing. Okay, I guess that's what you were also indicating in your questions. How do you get people mobilized and invested in changing admissions and doing these things?
Yeah, or at least to not stand in the way.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that. I mean,
well, it's remarkable because every time something happens, George Floyd's murder, and there was a lot of outrage, and then then it was gone. Everything lasts a news cycle, which is very distressing.
So how, I was trying to get you to talk earlier. Were you about to say something?
Nope.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm good.
Okay.
Maybe I don't know.
It's hard with the masks. I can't really
Yeah.
tell. You were talking about how to have these conversations with colleagues. We didn't really get into the nuts and bolts of that. So maybe let's bracket that and think about students. It's what you were saying, Tamara, about mentoring. How we from the top level, like need to think about or consider restructuring committees, thinking differently about mentorship. But this is what we tell students, right? Like, you need to have a mentoring network, right? No one person can give you everything you need. And so identify different people, put different people in place and cultivate those relationships, right? So we're telling students to do that. So how can we we're not going to change our colleagues' minds who don't want their minds changed. Like, how do we talk to students about these things? Like, how do we get students to have goals, right? I don't think anybody comes to get a PhD in English because they want to go on to manage, public historical society somewhere, which is what I would do, right? They come because they want to be an English professor for the most part, right now, at least.
Probably,
No?
but I think we just need to ask the question. Like, I don't think I was ever asked that question.
Yeah.
When I was in graduate, and I was like, oh, I was talking to this colleague elsewhere about this, and they're like, yeah, it's weird when I, for the first time I considered that question, it's like, oh wait, I can have goals. But I think if we have that question, then goals can look like many, many things, right? So, for example, people, applying for jobs. I think there are two questions you ask, like what is your goal for, like, what job do you want and what career do you want? Those are two different questions and they have different answers and there's a relationship between them, but it's not the same thing. And so I think it's important to be, and this is what we do anyways in classes, to push ourselves and to push our students to be really specific and really precise about naming what it is they want, naming what it is they do. I think those are skills that help people be successful scholars, let's say, is precision always. And I think it's easy to, like, when we get caught in the language of apocalypse or crisis, we just kind of drop it at that, like, oh, I'm not going to get anything. I'll be lucky to get anything. help you get this. And certainly I look at my career and I think of a lot of moments of good fortune, but when we talk about luck and when we talk about good fortune, we're not talking about work and the work that we do, the work of our support networks that so many people have put in to help us get to where we are. So again, I think that precision, that thinking about, as someone who's had many different tenure track jobs over my career, I do really think about jobs versus career and the relationship between those two things. And I think that helps students. So if we think in geographic terms, go back, the student. So I went to graduate school at NYU. I was in New York, and the idea, my first job was in Lubbock, Texas. It was a fantastic job for me. But the thought, but the thought of moving from New York City to Lubbock, Texas was terrifying. But, again, if I could think about that as it's not that I was like, oh, I'm going to move there and move away as soon as possible. But if I think in these terms, like I'm going to go there, I'm going to work, I'm going to be developing a career, and that opens all kinds of doors, whether it's to stay in that career, to stay in that job and build a career there, or to move. These are all super complicated and personal issues. But I think, again, that precision is important. And I did actually want to come back also a caution. I'm always super cautious about when we talk about the profession, when we talk about careers, when we talk about tenure and things like that. I think it's an important conversation for us to have professionally and among colleagues, but I also think it's potentially a dangerous conversation to have insofar as people outside of, if we think of the academy always under attack, right? That any, part of what we do is to push against each other, to push ideas, to take contrary stances. It's very easy for those contrary stances, which may be temporary at one point, for someone outside to pick up on them and say, this is what's wrong with the academy, this is what's wrong with tenure, this is what's wrong with careers, this is what's wrong with X, Y, and Z. Therefore, let's continue to undermine that process. I'm not saying that this is what we're doing here right now, that it's dangerous, but it's always in the back of my mind. And that's one of the things that often holds me back from like saying, well, I think tenure is good, but I have these issues with the tenure process, which I think aren't helpful. Or I think that, anyway.
I think because there's a lot of attacks on the humanities and wants to be careful not to fall into the other or to give the other side something to get rid of or whatever. I wanted to say practically to what you were saying. I really liked your answer, Barbara. I think there's like in our department when new students come in, we have a welcoming event or whatever, and to bring in a career person at the beginning, like to set the tone that there is a really great career center at UCLA. It's fabulous. And there's so many workshops and so many things that go on at UCLA, but making students aware early, and then we have an introduction to, we have a pro seminar, not an introduction to CompLit, and to put that also in there, like these are the career, or start talking, so the discussion is early and it's sort of continuous. And I guess it being part of the culture. We also have a second year review where we start talking to students about what their plans are. So having formal occasions to keep dialoguing about all of this. And then I was thinking, we just had one student graduate who was very aware of many opportunities on the market. And in a way, have opportunities for her to dialogue with other students. Like she did all this research on a certain kind of job, and if that information can be communicated. We have in our department David McFadden, and he's been extremely strong on all this. So we have a situation, I think, where it's very present. I did want to say, it feels like COVID, though, has hit all of this hard. All of this, getting together with students, all of this welcoming, all of it. It's not like it. We're still not quite a community. So COVID's hit all of this super hard. Like I don't even know sometimes what the discipline is, because the discipline is like, there hasn't been a conference in 3 years. And I was just at a meeting last week and we were all like, is there still like a discipline? Just people are really, they're feeling out, they don't know what's going on. So I think that contributes also right now to this situation. It's hard in COVID-ish times to think of, okay, we can do this workshop, but people aren't leaving the house or whatever it is.
And I think especially like, we can sort of see this in last year's cohort, more in this year's cohort, and then even more in next year, is to remember that the students who will be coming in for the next several years will never have had what we would call a traditional or a normal education.
That's right.
And so the what we might perceive as weaknesses from training, whether that's writing or like so much of that is informed from their specific experience. And so that's going to demand from us a different kind of approach, a different kind of patience with students, a different kind of like, there are reasons why you may not know how to write in the way that we hope you to write. You just didn't have that close mentorship. It just structurally that was enabled. So that's going to also, unfortunately, everything always trickles in a sense downhill, right? That demands more labor from us, more affective labor, more just intellectual labor, more mentoring labor, all of which is good. No, I mean, like, it's work I like to do, but what I don't like is that continually comes down, downhill. So, that not wanting to criticize my institution, I love that we get emails that acknowledge all the crises that we've been into, and that we should that we should look after our students. Okay, that's right. We should look after. What does that mean? Oh, that means I need to look after our students, and I need to be on the front line, which I will always do. But I'm sure we all are. I'm tired of every day having a student coming in crisis and in tears, things that I'm not. I'm not. Yes, I'm not qualified. Yeah, I'm not qualified for this, right? And not only am I not qualified, but their crisis becomes my crisis and becomes our crises. And where do I go after that? Like, do I walk into the chancellor's office and say, I'm in crisis? No, right? It just goes down that way. It doesn't go back up. And so it's great that we're having these conversations, but also those conversations need to happen in that direction as well. Like, there has to be more than, and I'm sure there is more than an email. There has to be a real acknowledgement of what's going on. And that looks like many things. It looks like time, it looks like compensation, it looks like support. And, again, UCLA has done wonderful things. I think they've been fantastic actors over COVID in terms of letting us know, minimizing disruption as much as they could, all of those things, and providing extra research funds for people who have been affected. Like, all of that's fantastic, but that also doesn't quite capture the entirety of what's going on, and which we will, as the kind of front lines, to use a terrible military metaphor, we will be reaping the harvest for the next 20 years, right? There are no students in the next 20 years who will not have been deeply affected by COVID.
I was going to say one interesting thing. I was in Georgia, and a professor was telling me of the studies they've done. Sorry, I don't know her name, but she's telling me of the studies they've done. One study shows that the thing that's really lost on Zoom is networking and connections to mentors, and that is affecting careers horribly. She said that was one piece of data that's really emerging. And I thought that was interesting, because what did we actually lose through Zoom? That's a very, very, I can imagine it. Like, how do you get the networking and the connection that you might at a conference or whatever that goes on? She was speaking not about academia, about companies, and that it's been devastating for young employees. So I just thought that as well, if that's gone, that makes it, the job market is extremely opaque. If you're in your bedroom. It's
opaque no matter where you are.
That's true. That's true. It's like, where is it? What is it?
It's on the job wiki. I wanted to just take a kind of meta moment, and we're bringing up lots of things, lots of different areas of concern. But one thing that I'm hearing and listening to both of you speak is like a slightly different orientation, because Tamara, your departments seem like maybe a couple of steps ahead of ours, just in terms of having built attention to these things into the structures of your curriculum. And Cristobal, you're just like an awesome guy, all around, like a really like nice person and attentive mentor. So, you are speaking about, how do we deal with these things? How do we talk to students about, goals and this and COVID and crisis? And it's all for you, or the way you're talking about it now, coming from a place of mentorship. How do I, Professor Silva, how am I mentoring these students? But so the question here is, that's just an observation, and then a question, you can take this wherever you want. Like, how, thinking about graduate education in the 21st century, like how is change implemented? Like, do all think, how do we think about the difference between departmental attention, institutional attention, and the individual attention we give when we ourselves are tapped out, but there's really like no time to be tired, Cristobal.
Yeah. How do we do that? Go ahead. Yeah, please.
I guess every department's different. I'm not actively in musicology, and you mentioned ethnomusicology, but I don't know ethnomusicology. But I'm not so I don't know as much what they're doing right now in terms of. I know more about what comparative literature is doing. I think on a departmental level, there's a lot one can do. One is a faculty member. One can. There's curriculum committees. There are teaching committees. There's an incredible amount one can do. For example, if one is worried, let's say I was worried about a language requirement or something, I can bring it to my colleagues. So I feel the departmental level is very active and interesting, but I'm in small departments.
Yeah, that's
So English is humongous. We're like humongous. I don't know how that operates. I've always been in little teeny tiny boutique apartment. Complet and musicology are 10, 15 people or something like that. The division, that's interesting. And that's where I think you're like grad division. I think grad division, I have a lot of faith in grad division.
Tell me more. I'm all ears.
Well, because I feel like this, I've often, as director of graduate studies, I often consult with graduate division. I would love active involvement and understand the rules they put in place. That's where a lot can happen. Graduate division, not necessarily setting rules. That would be odd. Like all of you do. I mean,
that's grad council's job, by the way.
Grad council. That's right. But I guess I feel that's true, and I guess grad council. So I guess these. I'm on the general education, and that's an amazing committee for organizing general education at UCLA. So I feel we do have very excellent committees where we can really get a lot done. Or the whole, maybe I shouldn't mention that, but the way the diversity requirement finally came through. And
I'm still tired from that.
I know. But I feel UCLA, we have the structure in place, a very good structure for actively getting involved.
I agree. So I'd say a couple of things. I think your observation about the size of departments is a huge thing, obviously.
True.
So that's really important. So, I mean, I think departments, depending on their size, need to think strategically about how we want to do that. Second, so like I'll say again, from my experience, so I came here in my first quarter here was in 2019. So I literally spent 1 quarter on campus and then 2 years with it. So the thing that's kind of difficult for us, so I would say 2 things. One is what I have noticed in being here is a tremendous amount of good faith across the board. Like people are pulling in I think in the same direction, maybe slightly different strategies and all that. That's fine. But I think the momentum is in a broader direction. I think AMIGA helps demonstrate that. I think your work, Marissa, helps demonstrate that. And certainly when I stepped on campus, the feeling of what diversity and DEI specifically meant to UCLA was different than in any institution I've been. Small colleges, large state schools, Ivy League, fundamentally different. In fact, Ivy League schools were hiring people from UCLA working in DEI to go work there, right? So to me, that's a huge, massive change. The other difficulty is, and this is with respect to my situation and COVID, is that, so I'm here finishing my 3rd year and I feel like I'm completely new. Right. I don't know. I know, like I hear about these committees. I'm on the Legislative Assembly. I kind of know what that is, but I'm still kind of lost, right? And partly that's probably my personality, but in large part, it just means it might be the institution, but it's also COVID has really completely broken things apart. So that's both like a barrier for us, but it's also, I think, an opportunity, as we meet up. So like for me, that's one of the things I've loved about AMIGA is not only that it's work that I believe in, but it's this opportunity to actually now meet people across departments who are committed to pulling in the same direction and say, okay, so how can we have these conversations? How can we think strategically about these, both at the department level, at the college level, university, and then across UC and across institutions, which I think is AMIGA's big goal.
So I love that. And also, I think Marissa and I met in 2 other cross-disciplinary things that happened.
I feel like I've always known you. Now you're in every committee I've ever.
But I was going to say, I love at UCLA that, I mean, I love at UCLA that there are so many of those cross-departmental, let's get this project done, and a lot of, and I think there is goodwill. That is interesting you say that, because there's a lot of goodwill at UCLA. Not that that means that things are being solved, but there's a lot of goodwill.
But this is also baked into the DNA of University of California, right? And in particular, and again, I don't want to dismiss my experiences, so I was undergrad at UC Berkeley, but in particular, and UCLA, right? So Berkeley and UCLA in particular have that DNA that's now 50 years old, over 50 years old, right? And I think, again, that's across UC. And I think just to remember
it's being
that.
smashed to pieces in a way.
Yeah. I mean,
Public good in California.
and it gets co-opted in certain ways. But the other thing to remember is, especially when we talk about the dreaded term austerity, is to remember, right, that the state of California has $100 billion surplus right now.
No,
So that there's no such thing as austerity, right? That's a choice. Like, people have made decisions to money in certain ways, to give $400 gasoline rebates instead of funding other things. And this is the thing I really believe in terms of precision, is we need to make people, or insist that people say the things they don't want to say aloud, right? To say, we prefer to give a gas rebate than to fund education. Okay, that's your choice, but say it.
Yeah.
Say it and hold ourselves accountable and hold them accountable, right? The same thing
I
is,
mentioned earlier Christopher Neufeld, it is Neufeld.
I think so.
And Christopher Neufeld, and I'm very fond of him, and I fond of his work. And he has so many projects about what's happened to the public good in California. And I think we should follow. I think there are debates. He has a group where people debate things happening in the university, and it's wonderful. And so we keep that up. Like, first of all, again, knowledge. Do people know all this stuff that's happening? Do people know how many tenure track programs lost their tenure track lines, or where tenure is threatened in the United States right now, or what the AUP, all that stuff? A lot of people may not know it's even going on.
Yeah.
So, gaining some kind of awareness.
I want to also just note that, we're going until 1, so we're about 10 minutes out from our conclusion. And I want to invite, if you have questions or comments or things that you want to contribute, please use the Q&A feature, use the chat feature. We will talk to you. You're looking at a giant screen in this room, so you'll just pop right up and we'll see it. So please do. And I wanted to circle back to a couple of things you were saying, Cristobal. Like, I have never thought, really, I guess I did just say, if COVID gave us a gift, it was that now we can work remotely, or know that work can be flexible. But I hadn't thought about COVID as like an opportunity for, I think, really catalyzing attention to holistic admissions. And in a lot of ways it was, right? Because so many programs like temporarily stopped requiring the GRE, but it really did force a lot of programs to think like, okay, in the absence of, or, granting that everyone's education for the past 2 years was a total poop show. Like, how do we think about performance? How do we think about GPA? So that it's like, that's true. Thank you for framing it that way. I always tell my kids every crisis is an opportunity.
Yeah.
That usually applies to like, oh no, I've stepped on my Lego thing. And I'm like, oh. So, but in a way, that's what happened to higher education. Somebody stepped on the Lego.
And everything is slowed down, and slowing down can be very helpful to the world. Not that it's helping the world, we're in a war and it's falling apart.
Absolutely. And again, the insistence that, although supposedly the world seems to think it's outside of the COVID crisis, that to know that for us, this is it's a 20-year thing, right?
Yeah.
At minimum, right? And then whatever happens after is going to be the next generation result of those big structural changes if they occur. But like, our students and our kids who were kindergarten, who were too young to remember COVID when it started, they are all affected and will continue to be affected by it on every level of their social and intellectual development and cultural development, right?
And I guess what happened at the university, as faculty had to stay home, the administration seems to have made more decisions, or there seems to have been more top-down happening, not only UCLA. It just seemed to be a thing that the faculty was less able to hear all the time because they weren't there, what was going on. And so I think now we're in this sludge period where people are trying to like, are we back? can we come back now and trying to figure out what's going on.
Another thing you said, Cristobal, that I kind of want to ask you to be precise. Say this thing that you're not saying.
Okay.
But you said that the attention to DEI, or the language of DEI, the kinds of things DEI felt different here than it had at any other institution. So, and it sounded like you were tying that to, you know, the master plan for higher education in California, like the mission of the UC, but maybe.
Yeah, well, I don't
mean?
So not the master plan. I just think that, you know, for so much of my, let's say, career from undergraduate onward, when institutions talk about diversity, they talk about it as like, yeah, that's something we should probably have because it's going around, like we're talking about that. There's a lot of money involved in it. Yeah. There's probably some prestige involved in it. And I think it's anyone who's gone through the system of, we can call it, you know, from affirmative action to diversity, has sort of felt that, right? The pressure of that and the insidious nature that it can be, right? So I firmly believe in diversity. I firmly believe in affirmative action, but it has to be, it has to be come from a place where people believe both in equality. So that's what I like, the equality and inclusion part of diversity. Equity and inclusion. But it also has to come from a fundamental knowledge that diversity isn't a plus, it's a core of knowledge production. In fact, if you are not thinking about diversity, then you are not producing knowledge in a way that's lasting, I will even say, I would be really polemical here, that is valuable. You are just like creating a little kind of fiefdom, a rabbit hole. But that diversity, equity, and inclusion is about a serious intellectual project. And those things happen alongside one another. That I felt that coming to UCLA in a way that I've never felt that before.
I would say I don't like the word diversity and DIE. I don't like the term, but even though it's amazing to hear you say how positive it was at UCLA. We have a long way to go.
Yeah, well, that shows you what it was like in other places.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking actually.
Like that's we have a long way to go. But and what's great, nothing's great. But what's when any work of equity is every day. So we're at this day today, and we have many days ahead of us.
Yeah.
But
And so, I don't want to, it's like, I'm not trying to write like a hagiography of UCLA, but it just, again, like, I think it shows where, it shows, I think, you know, what for me, what the experience in the landscape were in right. So the example is, and without naming schools, but let's say private Ivy League school on the East Coast, when I was applying to graduate school, was told flat out, you don't have what it takes to succeed here. You're not going to make it here. Yeah. But your name sounds, you know, very ethnic. And so if you emphasize this, perhaps we can make a space for it.
Oh,
right. That was like straight to my face. Wow. And, you know, as direct as we can be, which was so, you know, you can feel that that's so deeply offensive on every level. And that was, you know, so this is now 20 some years ago. So hopefully, you know, no longer like that in that department. But that's the sense of diversity, equity and inclusion. That is the thing that I've been struggling against my entire life, even as it's not against that, but it's in fact to think about DI in a different way. And I think, again, this has been my experience. Like coming to UCLA, I felt for the first time a kind of like, oh, like, this might be a home.
I'm glad you feel that way.
I just want to say one thing. I think the reason DEI worries me right now, we're in a period where the right wing will take any term like critical race theory and run with it. And so one has to find a type of language that one cannot run with. And DEI is very easy to run with. That's why I'm always like, don't give anyone, diversity is easy to run with. What I mean by that, it becomes pretty meaningless pretty fast, or it can be used for anything. So I'm always thinking what language, and that's why I like also AMIGA, what language can we use, what processes that cannot be grabbed and turned into the opposite or used to malevolent ends or whatever.
And to kind of to try to pull these threads together by way of conclusion, part of why the UC is so invested in AMIGA and why UCLA as an institution is invested in catalyzing these conversations around holistic admissions is because we're a state institution, our mission is to serve the people of this state.
Yeah.
And this state is majority minority, and that is not the population that we are currently serving
Yes.
at our graduate cohorts, especially in the humanities. Our graduate cohorts are 50% white, more than 50% white currently, which, is not, that means we are not serving the people of the state. So back to what you were saying, Cristobal, that diversity, or whatever word you want to use, it has to be at the core of our intellectual and social mission institutionally. But then tying that back or tracking back to graduate education in the 21st century, those two things for me are like very intimately and intricately related, right? Because what is the purpose of graduate education in the 21st century? Well, I have some ideas. Like, I'm kind of old, right? Like, what I want to do is be bringing in, like I was saying, the humanities professionals of the future. And I want that to be as diverse a group of people as possible in every way, so that we can get a lot of different people in the room to come up with something new.
Yeah. Yeah, and I started it off with the history of going back to W.E. Du Bois. And so, we got the demographics of this country are changing. The university is going to radically change, thank God. And it's going to move in a new direction. I agree with you completely. But I guess I wouldn't say diversity because I don't like the word, but for me, it's often about correcting the injustice. Like, where did we get to the point where we only have so many white people? How did we get to this point that UCLA has whatever it is percent white people in graduate education and doesn't match the people of California whom it serves? So it's always the justice would be to correct that in any way possible. I believe in reparations, but I won't go there.
Topic for another time.
That's the next step.
We're one day. Were you about to say something? Because I was.
I don't think so.
No? Okay. Well,
probably
then.
said too much.
No, this was wonderful. It was wonderful. And thank you to everyone for joining us. And with that, we say goodbye, go forth, have a great lunch, and change the world.
Yes, indeed.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
I can't see the participants.
Can you leave?
Yeah, can I? Well, I kind of wanted to say hi to Steph and thank you. Steph, are you there?
I guess you could stop the recording.
She left us. Am I able to stop the recording? I feel like, so there's us, there's 3 participants right now. There's us, and then there's Steph, and then there's somebody else who's watching our blooper reel. And I don't know who it is. We can't see who it is. I just see that there's one other person. We'll just leave it. Maybe Steph, stepped away.
Should we click the leave?
I'm just gonna, she'll figure it out. All
But
right.
then we can't, everything we're saying is being recorded.
I'm not saying anything until.
Here, sorry, I'm gonna mute. I'll mute us.